the world through a single movement. The spirit of Korea meets the boundless energy of K-pop. No longer just a sport, Taekwondo is at the heart of K-culture, bringing Korea's spirit to the world. A beautiful culture, connecting heart to heart. We now strive to safeguard Taekwondo's community training culture as a treasured heritage for all humanity. The pride of Korea, Taekwondo.
Ideas ahead of their time have shaped a better world. A man who believed that culture could bring peace to the world. Kim Koo. The one thing I seek in infinite quantity is the power of a highly developed culture. This is because the power of culture brings happiness and meaning to our lives, and by extension, to the lives of others. My wish, culture of peace. 150th anniversary of the birth of Kim Koo.
Nearly 1,400 people remain unaccounted for after devastating flash floods swept through China and Nepal on Wednesday, leaving over 270 people dead as rescue efforts continue. A South Korean rapid response team is heading to Nepal as 9 Korean nationals remain missing after the devastating floods, with President Lee Jae-myung ordering authorities to mobilize every available resource in the search. The Bank of Korea has raised its key interest rate to 2% for a second straight month as it moves to contain the persistent inflationary pressures. The central bank also upgraded this year's growth forecast to 3.3%. Nearly 1,400 people are missing in Nepal and China's Tibet region, many of them tourists and pilgrims, after a catastrophic flash flood swept through Himalayan valleys. Our Cho Young-eun has the latest.
Rescue efforts are intensifying in Nepal and China after a massive wall of water crashed through valleys along the Nepal-China border. In Nepal's Rasua district, the floods swept away critical infrastructure, including dozens of bridges and around 40 kilometers of roads, complicating search and rescue efforts. Rescue teams are continuing to search for survivors as authorities warn that the death toll could rise further.
All I want is that my husband comes back to me safely in one piece. I do not want anything else.
According to Nepalese authorities, at least 270 bodies have been recovered and confirmed dead. The number of people listed as missing in Nepal rose to 826, including members of the Nepalese army and police forces, and 517 foreigners, Nepal's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority said in its latest update. The number of people missing on the Chinese side has risen to 558, including 264 nationals, bringing the total number of missing people to at least 1,384. Many of the foreign nationals were traveling as tourists or pilgrims, including people visiting Mount Kailash and Lake Manosarovar, a sacred site revered by Hindus and Buddhists. The U.S. Geological Survey says the disaster was triggered by a glacial collapse that caused a massive landslide and flash flood. According to Chinese state media, the region still faces the risk of landslides, mudslides, and flash floods, with 3 days of rain ahead. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
As Nepal races to locate hundreds of missing in light of Wednesday's flooding, the Korean government is mounting its own emergency operation for 9 nationals whose whereabouts remain unknown. For more on the response, we have our Oh Soo-young on the line from the Foreign Ministry. Soo-young, what is the latest you're hearing?
Hi there, Tammy. Sure. So Seoul is stepping up measures for rescue missions for Korean nationals as well as broader recovery efforts for Nepal, while a joint government response team travels there with 9 Koreans remaining out of reach. Now, this all came during Foreign Minister Cho Hyun's phone call with his Nepalese counterpart, Shusir Kanal, on Thursday afternoon. The flooding, of course, struck Nepal's northern Rasuwa district on Wednesday morning, where employees of Korea's Southeast Power and Busan Ability were building a hydroelectric power plant. Now, told us said that 9 of the 10 Koreans who are stranded have now been flown to safety via helicopter. The remaining person was a Busan Ability site manager who stayed behind along with 2 Korean embassy staff. Now, a foreign ministry official just told us reporters that the group had been receiving food, water and medical supplies and remains in good health. However, 9 Koreans connected to the project are still out of contact. Now, Foreign Minister Cho requested Nepal's active support in locating and rescuing these 9 Koreans and enabling Korea's response team to work closely with local authorities. Cho also announced $1 million in humanitarian assistance to be delivered through international organizations operating in Nepal to support emergency response and early recovery. Now, Kanal briefed Cho on the Nepalese government's measures, and the 2 ministers agreed to maintain close communication and cooperation throughout this whole flood response and search operation.
And of course, Soo-young, our Korean government rapid response team left for Nepal early Thursday afternoon and earlier today. Fill us in on that.
Sure. So the 11-member response team left earlier this afternoon and is due to arrive in Kathmandu on Thursday night local time via Hong Kong. Now, led by In Sang-woo, the government's representative for overseas Korean protection from the Foreign Ministry, the National Fire Agency and the National Police Agency.
We will do everything possible to ensure the swift and safe search and rescue of our nationals in Nepal.
Now, response teams from the 2 companies involved, they also left for Nepal the same afternoon. Busan Ability dispatched a team led by its CEO, while Korea Southeast Power sent officials, including the head of its new growth business division. Now, once they arrive, the government and business officials will start coordinating further rescue efforts with the local authorities as well, according to a ministry official. Back to you, Tammy.
Alrighty, Soo-young, thank you for the coverage. Now, with the 9 Korean nationals still unaccounted for following the flash floods in Nepal, President Lee Jae-myung convened an emergency meeting on Thursday afternoon. He urged the authorities to mobilize all available resources, saying there's no such thing as too much effort when it comes to protecting people's lives. He ordered the government to assign dedicated officials to support the families of those missing and to keep them updated on the latest developments. President Lee also called for close cooperation with the Nepalese government to make sure all necessary resources can be deployed for research, search and rescue efforts. Expressing his sympathy to the people of Nepal, the president instructed officials to look into what assistance Korea could provide, including humanitarian aid. In other news, Korea's central bank has now delivered back-to-back rate hikes amid concerns over inflation. Now, strong chip experts also pushed this year's growth forecast sharply higher to 3.3%. Our correspondent Kim Jun-hong has this report.
The Bank of Korea has raised its key interest rate by 0.25 percentage points to 3%. Thursday's move comes with 6 of 7 Monetary Policy Board members voting for an increase, with 1 backing a hold. This marks the 2nd consecutive hike after last month's quarter-point increase, bringing the rate above 3% for the first time in 1 year and 9 months. The central bank has put greater weight on early action as chip-driven growth adds to price pressures, with inflation remaining above its 2% target.
Early monetary policy action is essential to maintain macroeconomic stability. Research shows acting early can anchor inflation expectations sooner and reduce the scale and duration of tightening while easing the impact on growth.
The governor said the timing and pace of further hikes will depend on inflation and growth. The 6-month-ahead rate projection also points to further tightening, with projections reaching up to 3.5%.
I expect the rate to reach as high as 3.5% by next year. The Monetary Policy Committee appears strongly inclined toward further tightening, but with no 3.75% projection in the dot plot and a dissenting vote today, there is also caution against raising rates too quickly.
The BOK also updated its economic outlook, lifting this year's growth forecast to 3.3% from 2.6%. The upgrade reflects a strong chip cycle and its broader economic impact, despite continued uncertainty from the Middle East war. Next year's forecast was also raised by 0.8 percentage points from the May estimate. Meanwhile, the inflation forecast for this year was kept unchanged at 2.7%. Yet core inflation, closely watched by the BOK, is forecast to remain elevated at 2.5% both this year and the next. Governor Shin Yeon-song stressed the need for action before inflationary pressures spread further. The central bank's unusual second straight hike signals a continued focus on inflation amid a 3.3% growth outlook. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
Nvidia has once again exceeded Wall Street expectations, more than doubling its quarterly revenue. The market analysts expect this strong momentum to provide a major lift to Korean chip makers and the broader domestic market. Our Lee Ju-yeon tells us more.
Nvidia has once again blown past Wall Street expectations as booming demand for artificial intelligence chips continued to drive extraordinary growth. The chip maker on Wednesday reported net income of nearly $59.7 billion for the May to July quarter, more than double the $26.4 billion recorded during the same period last year. Adjusted earnings came in at $2.22 per share, beating analyst forecast of $2.09. Revenue also more than doubled from a year earlier, reaching $96.22 billion and easily topping Wall Street estimate of about $92.3 billion. And the company expects the momentum to continue. Nvidia is forecasting about $108 billion in revenue for the current August to October quarter, well above analyst estimate of roughly $104.9 billion. If Nvidia reaches that target, quarterly revenue will rise about 89% from a year earlier, suggesting the company's already remarkable growth remains strong. Experts anticipate that global semiconductor sentiment will remain strong, driving further gains for Korean chipmakers.
As Nvidia announced, a projected revenue growth of over 70% next year underscores that demand for semiconductors will continue to rise. This, in turn, is expected to have a positive impact on investor sentiment regarding Korean chipmakers.
The benchmark KOSPI showed positive momentum on Thursday, driven by gains in major chip giants like Samsung Electronics and SK hynix. Strong foreign and institutional buying drove the market as Nvidia's earnings eased concerns over AI industry growth. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
The Korean won has seen a dramatic rebound recently, pushing the U.S. dollar exchange rate down by over 171 in less than 2 months. Now, for a deeper look into what's driving this rapid currency shift and how it's affecting global asset markets, our economics correspondent Park Jun-han joins us in the studio. Welcome back, Jun-han.
Good evening, Tammy. It's good to be back.
Jun-han, the won has seen a pretty dramatic rebound recently. Could you first break down the numbers first and what's driving this sudden shift?
Right, Tammy. So today I brought some props, a US dollar bill and a Korean bill. So this $100 bill has lost 12% of its value against the won in just a couple of months. That means my 50,000 won bill has gained 13% against the greenback. According to data from the Bank of Korea, the exchange rate peaked around the 1,550 to 61 level between May and July, but it has now dropped significantly to hover in the 1,381 range. A primary driver behind this shift is domestic companies actively converting their dollars into Korean won. And among them, the big market mover was Korean tech giant SK hynix. In July, SK hynix raised $26.5 billion through an American depository receipt listing. With billions of these dollars flowing directly into the domestic foreign exchange market for reinvestment here in Korea, it has effectively helped cool down the recent dollar price hikes. And it is not just SK hynix. Other major exporters in the semiconductor and shipbuilding sectors are converting their overseas dollar holdings into won, which helps bring the exchange rate down. Monetary policy also played a crucial role. In a rare move, the Bank of Korea has raised the country's benchmark interest rate for a second consecutive month from 2.75% to 3%, taking preemptive action to contain inflation. The widened yield gap between Korea and the U.S. has now narrowed to 0.75 percentage points, effectively making the Korean won stronger than it was a few months before.
Well, we've also seen a massive shareholder return announcement from tech giants like Samsung Electronics and SK hynix recently. How significant are corporate payouts actually contributing to dollar selling and helping cool down the high foreign exchange rates?
Right, as just mentioned, both Samsung Electronics and SK hynix have announced massive shareholder return programs in recent weeks. Samsung Electronics plans a share buyback and cancellation program worth between 90 trillion and 110 trillion won. SK hynix is also stepping in with a 40 trillion won stock repurchase and cancellation plan. While it is unclear how much of the dollar proceeds will actually be converted into won for shareholder returns, these plans worth a combined 150 trillion won could further strengthen the won. Let's take a listen to what an economics professor had to say.
Whether the money comes back as dividends or is reinvested domestically, it ultimately has to be converted into won. So what matters is not the percentage of dividends, but how much profit is actually brought back into Korea and converted into won.
One thing is clear, billions of dollars will flow into Korea's foreign exchange market.
That's good. Well, then the question is, why is the dollar weakening and why are the assets like cryptocurrencies and commodities rising?
Right, so weakening confidence in the greenback is pushing capital into alternative assets like gold or Bitcoin. A major catalyst behind this rally was the U.S. Treasury Secretary's announcement to expand long-term debt buybacks. Higher Treasury yields usually support the dollar. But if yields rise because of fiscal concerns rather than stronger monetary policy expectations, the dollar can weaken instead. However, an economics professor said there are many variables that affect swings in currency. Let's take a listen.
Interest rates do affect exchange rates, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. Other factors have to remain the same for that relationship to hold. With oil prices rising and the war in the Middle East dragging on, I think concerns have grown that the U.S. dollar's influence is less than what it used to be.
As the U.S. dollar weakens, the value of what are considered alternative assets has risen. Bitcoin recently broke past $80,000 for the first time in over 3 months, touching $81,257 amid short squeezes and massive spot ETF inflows. International gold prices also rebounded from below $4,000 in June to surpassing $4,620 per ounce as of Thursday. Ultimately, an excessively high exchange rate burdens the domestic economy by driving up import prices. That is why financial authorities have been stepping in to cool down the overheated market.
A volatile market is what I could definitely say, Chunan. Thank you for the breakdown tonight.
Always a pleasure, Dami.
In the Middle East, Qatar visited Iran this Thursday as part of its mediation efforts to pause hostilities in the region amid an escalating standoff between Washington and Tehran. Lee Si-hu has more.
Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani is due to visit Tehran on Thursday with the aim of de-escalating tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar's Foreign Affairs Ministry announced in a statement on X on Wednesday that its prime minister will meet with Iranian officials to discuss ways to, quote, create conditions conducive to dialogue. Iran has confirmed the visit and said the discussions will cover the continuation of Qatar's mediation efforts as well as regional developments. Back in June, Qatar served as a back-channel negotiator between the U.S. and Iran during the signing of its interim peace deal, which helped briefly pause hostilities that have continued since February. The agreement between Washington and Tehran has since collapsed in July, without a diplomatic breakthrough to date. And Thursday's talks follow the U.S.'s announcement of a new wave of sanctions aimed at isolating Iran economically. The escalating standoff between Washington and Tehran following U.S. and Israel strikes on Iran 6 months ago has deadlocked crucial shipping lanes and diplomatic channels. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
It's been a turbulent 2 weeks, with U.S. President Donald Trump reaching out to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, fueling hopes for a possible breakthrough despite no response from Pyongyang. Against this backdrop, the unification ministry here held its biggest annual event, the Global Korea Forum. Our Kim Do-young was there.
South Korea's unification minister Chung Dong-young says a major transition in inter-Korean relations is underway, offering a chance to break years of deadlock as U.S. President Donald Trump reaches out to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Another great transition is beginning. I interpret this as an opening window of opportunity, not a crisis. We must constantly move to seize and create this golden opportunity for peace.
The remarks came on Thursday while opening the ministry's largest annual event, the Global Korea Forum, held under the theme A New Paradigm for Peaceful Coexistence on the Korean Peninsula amid a transforming international order. In a speech read on his behalf at the event, President Lee Jae-myung reinforced this vision, stating that South Korea is a direct party and pacemaker for peace on the Korean Peninsula. He pledged unwavering efforts to support trust building and resume dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang. This suggests Seoul intends to seek an active role in facilitating talks between the two leaders following Trump's outreach. Chung also reiterated that the government will push to expand those discussions into four-party talks involving Beijing. At the forum, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond, delivered a keynote address. He touched on the cases of West and East Germany as well as Russia and Finland, stating peace on the Korean Peninsula is in the world's interest.
Your relations are the business of any country geographically near Korea. Your relations are also the business of any country that has trade relations with Korea, even if that country is geographically distant, like the U.S. For that reason, those of you concerned about the future relations of the two Koreas have no choice. You have to think about and prepare for attitudes of other countries.
The forum runs until Friday with around 40 experts, scholars, and politicians gathering to discuss practical measures for establishing peace on the peninsula. Kim Do-young, Arirang News.
North Korea has criticized U.S. weapon sales to South Korea and human rights funding, despite U.S. President Donald Trump's recent efforts to reach out to the regime. Citing Pyongyang's foreign ministry spokesperson, state media Korean Central News Agency claimed that the approval of AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles and human rights documentation funding are, quote, another example showing the continuous and consecutive nature of America's hostile practices. Now, this comes as the regime remains silent despite Donald Trump's efforts to resume talks with leader Kim Jong-un. Trump recently scaled down the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises to foster dialogue, but Pyongyang's latest message indicates it still views American policy as hostile. South Korea is tightening its crackdown on illegal Chinese fishing near the inter-Korean maritime border, with expanded enforcement and a new special unit near the northern limit line. Our Park Gon-woo has the details.
South Korea is taking stronger action against illegal Chinese fishing boats operating near the northern limit line, or NLL, the de facto maritime border between the two Koreas. Chinese boats have repeatedly crossed south of the NLL to engage in illegal fishing in South Korean waters, where foreign fishing vessels are prohibited from operating. At a joint briefing Thursday, the Korea Coast Guard and other agencies announced a package of tougher government-wide measures.
The Korea Coast Guard will work closely with related agencies to strengthen enforcement across all waters south of the NLL, The Foreign Ministry will also revise relevant regulations to crack down on activities linked to illegal fishing, including unauthorized anchoring.
Under planned legal revisions, authorities will be able to take action not only against illegal fishing itself, but also against activities unrelated to normal passage, such as unauthorized anchoring or remaining stationary in territorial waters. The government will also step up the removal of illegal fishing gear and strengthen its on-site enforcement capabilities. A new special enforcement unit will be established on Baekneungdo Island, in addition to the existing units on Yeonpyeongdo and Daecheongdo Islands. The Coast Guard plans to add 50 personnel and deploy 2 additional high-speed enforcement boats. Seoul will also strengthen cooperation with Beijing by sharing information on illegal fishing and urging Chinese authorities to take tougher action. The measures follow a joint crackdown earlier this month in which 8 Chinese fishing boats were seized. The number of vessels illegally operating near the NLL has fallen from around 200 a day in 2016 to fewer than 100. Still, with tens of vessels operating in the area and a fall blue crab fishing season beginning in September, authorities say enforcement will be further stepped up in waters south of the NLL. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
The heat is still going strong here both day and night at the end of August. Heatwave advisories are in place across many parts of the country. And with high humidity, it'll feel even more hot and muggy. With the atmosphere remaining unstable today and tomorrow, some areas could see passing showers. Today, rain will fall across parts of the southern regions with up to 60 millimeters. Tomorrow, the rain will spread farther north and east, reaching the east coast of Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-do provinces, as well as the southern regions. So be sure to keep an umbrella handy if you're heading out. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 25 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon 23 and Daegu 24 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 30 degrees, Daegu 28 and Gwangju will soar to 31 degrees. By Saturday, rain will spread across most parts of the country. And once the rain moves out, the heat will gradually start to ease. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
For thousands of years, one breath has endured. More than a martial art, it is the Korean way of life. Taekwondo, connecting the world. Smarter than ever, Taekwondo leaps toward a new future, connecting the world through a single movement. The spirit of Korea meets the boundless energy of K-pop. No longer just a sport, Taekwondo is at the heart of K-culture, bringing Korea's spirit to the world. A beautiful culture, connecting heart to heart. We now strive to safeguard Taekwondo's community training culture as a treasured heritage for all humanity. The pride of Korea, Taekwondo.
Beyond the horizon, a piercing whistle cuts through the cold silence. It is the sound of a haenyeo, Korea's legendary women divers, breaking the surface after a dive. This haunting sound is called sumbisori, a forceful exhale, a return to life. 10 meters beneath the waves, sometimes plunging as deep as 20 meters, haenyeo descend into the sea with no oxygen tanks, no machines, no safety lines. They carry only one thing into the depths: their breath. The most wondrous moment comes when they rise to the surface. As lungs burn and oxygen runs thin comes sumbisori, a sharp whistle of breath meeting air once again. It is more than exhalation. It is survival transformed into sound. An astonishing technique that restores oxygen quickly, preparing them for another descent. Enduring crushing water pressure, they remain underwater for a few minutes. Yet through remarkable physical adaptation, rivaling that of semi-aquatic mammals, they harvest the sea to support their families. Their weathered faces, carved by salt and time, stand as quiet testimony to lives spent not conquering nature, but living alongside it with restraint and respect. For centuries, haenyeo have lived by one rule: take only what is needed, leave enough for tomorrow. They do not conquer the sea, they live with it. But today, this extraordinary tradition faces extinction. With the average haenyeo now in their 70s, their way of life is fading. Recognized by UNESCO in 2016 as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, haenyeo are more than divers. They are living proof that resilience and harmony with nature remain among humanity's greatest strengths. And each time sumbisori echoes across the water, it carries a timeless truth. Life endures, courage rises, and some traditions are too precious to disappear.
When did it all begin? The beginning of joy embedded in daily life, where steps of learning meet a bigger world, and history coexists. The legend continues. Innovative technologies come together to unfold a new future, building a better tomorrow. A joy accessible to all, always present in your daily life. JDC.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. South Korea's economy is growing faster than expected, but that strong momentum is bringing a new set of policy challenges. With inflation still running above target, the Bank of Korea has raised interest rates for the second straight month, signaling that strong growth may now be adding to price pressures. Now, at the same time, the government is heading in the opposite direction, preparing its biggest ever budget as it looks to turn stronger revenues into investment for future growth. So with monetary policy tightening while fiscal policy expands, can Korea keep growth on track without creating new risks for inflation, debt, and the financial markets? For answers to this, we are joined in the studio by Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Very big welcome.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us online is Hwa-Kyun Kim, Professor of Banking and Finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Good to see you.
Pleasure to meet you.
So let's start a discussion with Professor Kim with today's rate hike, of course. So what do you think drove the BOK to raise its rates for the second straight month? And do you think it was the right decision?
I think it was a good decision, and the easy way to look at like the interest rate from the standpoint of monetary policy is like these two variables. So the one is basically the expected inflation or inflation, and the other is the growth potential and also the economic growth. So like you just briefly mentioned earlier, so the Korean economic forecast actually was higher than expected, or at least we have seen this, the chip exports and other things definitely just increasing the prospects for the Korean economic growth. Therefore, if the expected inflation is higher, then I think it's a good idea to increase the interest rate. And also if the growth potential is higher, it's good to just increase the interest rate. So in that regard, both, I think the expected inflation is somewhat higher than around like 2% that just normally the central banks actually target at. So it's around like 2.5 to 2.8%, I think, depending on the definitions of the inflation. So it's higher. And also the growth potential or the forecast actually is higher. Therefore, it's probably a good move to increase the interest rates. Another angle to look at the interest rate is typically we just look at the real growth rate or the economic growth plus the expected inflation. That's going to give you a rough idea about like how the interest rate of this the economy is. So if we just add up about like this 3% or 3.5%, even like the growth potential plus the about 2-point-something% of the inflation expectation, we around actually have about 5 or 6%, like roughly speaking, of the interest rate target in some sense. So we're actually still behind, below the Korean interest rate, actually below that type of the interest rate. So in that regard, increasing the interest rate, I think, was the good move. I know that there were some different opinions in the market, but overall, I think this is a good move. Mm-hmm. And also from the standpoint of the exchange rates, I think the lowering the gap, the narrowing the gap between the U.S. rate and the Korean rate, I think it's a good idea. So overall, I think it was a right move.
Mm-hmm. So with the BOK now seeing much stronger growth, then how much did that factor into today's decision compared with inflation concerns?
I think it was definitely one of the key anchors. I think it was important decision-making points. And I think given that inflation expectation is still higher than 2%, and also the housing price still a bit higher, and also the oil price and other import price is higher, I think the BOK definitely wanted to raise the interest rate even before the Governor Shin, I think. But I think because of the many other issues, especially somewhat lower expected growth, at least I think about a year ago or a year and a half ago, that even if the BOK wanted to raise the rate at that time, they were actually hesitant to raise the rate. Now the economic forecast is higher, actual growth is just supporting that. And for the time being, it's going to be like this. Therefore, I think the BOK was a bit more confident about raising the interest rate to fight against the inflation and potentially other issues such as exchange rates and something else. So I think overall, I think this was actually a very important point about this raising interest rate, the economic growth. And at the same time, now the exchange rate, I think, is finally just going back to its mean, which is about like 250 or 201 per dollar. But still, I think it's way above like that. So the BOK still probably tries to also handle that with this interest rate increase as well.
Mm-hmm. So it really gave more room for the BOK to focus on inflation. Now, adding to this, Professor Young, Moody's is even more upbeat. It forecasts 3.5% growth this year. What do you think is behind this such a sharp turnaround?
Okay, well, it's basically exports of semiconductors. Moody's is slightly higher than others at 3.5%, but other recent estimates are not really that far behind. KDI just came out with their estimates last week. It was 3.2. Bank of Korea came up with 3.3 today. So 3.5 is slightly optimistic. It's not completely out of the range of possibilities. In fact, the way that the estimates for the growth rate has shot up in the last 6 months. I would not be completely surprised if it's even higher than 3.5%. But having said that, there's still a lot of uncertainty involved. If we look at the Bank of Korea report today, I was a bit surprised because they have something that they don't usually have, which is they listed some possible positive and negative shocks that can affect the growth estimate. And if there's a negative shock to the semiconductor sector or the Middle East gas prices, each may bring down the growth by 0.1 percentage point. On the other hand, if things are brighter in these fronts than expected, if the semiconductor boom accelerates, or if the Middle East Iran war ends early, then the growth estimate is may rise by 0.2 percentage points for semiconductor boom, 0.1 percentage point for Middle East gas price falling. So the best case scenario by the Bank of Korea estimates is actually 3.6%. On the other hand, it could go as low as 3.1%. So, and if you compare the details between the KDI estimates and the Bank of Korea estimates, they're actually, in some ways, some different for investment and for exports. So I think that just gives you an idea that while Korea is expected to grow very well this year, there is still perhaps a lot more uncertainty than usual years. So even though there's only about 4 months left in the calendar year, there's still a lot more uncertainty compared to other years.
Right, so that's why they were able to provide those kinds of variables, of course. Now, as you've mentioned, Professor Young, chips are still a major driver. Then how much of that strength do you think is spreading to the rest of the economy? And also, is growth still too dependent on semiconductors?
Well, I'm not sure if the dependence is the right word for it, but it's definitely being led by semiconductors. If you look at the Bank of Korea report today, then they adjusted the consumption numbers from 2.0 in the last estimate to 2.1. So there's only a very slight increase in the expectation of growth rate for consumption. Construction, the same thing. It actually fell in the Bank of Korea estimates from 0.6% expected growth in the last estimate to 0.2% growth in the current estimate. KDI is sort of similar. They did not, when they revised the numbers and published the revised numbers last week, there were just slight increase in consumption and no changes in construction. So all the action is taking place in investment and exports. And from the Bank of Korea report, the facilities investment, the business investment growth rate was revised from 4.4 to 6.8%. Exports, the previous estimate was 4.9% growth for this year. It was revised to 9.7%. So basically, it's telling you that all the action is taking place with the semiconductors. Now, next year's growth, both do expect some effect to go outside the semiconductors, but the problem is, will it take place? Again, that is uncertain for now. But for now, this year, all the growth is expected in the semiconductors industry.
So the key would be whether this can spread beyond the semiconductor industry as well. Now, we are seeing 2 straight hikes. Then what about the next? Professor Kim, where do you think the rates would go from here? Do you think another rate hike is possible this year, or is it time for the BOK to wait and see?
Both are possible, but I would say if the economic growth prospectus continues, probably led by the chip exports and also other parts of the economy actually recovering better, I think the BOK is probably going to raise one more time. But if you look at the Fed rate target, which is around like 3.5 to 3.75%, so I think we are getting closer. So I think the Korean I would say the rate is likely to be stay around like 3.25 to 3.5-ish. So I think for the time being, as long as the growth actually potential not completely just going the opposite direction in the next 6 months or a year, I would say one more time. But probably the next time they will pause one time. And then if the economic growth actually after the first half is still pretty strong and persistent, I think in the next half, I think the half of the early 2027 at least, we will see one more hike or two, probably just evening out with the U.S. interest rates. And I think that's probably the right call, given all the movements of the interest rates, also exchange rates and expected inflation, etc. So, but that's my guess.
So markets will have to watch closely on the next movements on that. Now, shifting gears, Professor Yang, the government is also moving to the other direction when it comes to the budget, a record budget of more than 800 trillion won. But we've been saying that the growth is already quite strong, though uncertain. Do you think this level of expansion is really necessary?
No. So let me explain why. We are expecting 3.3% growth this year. The potential growth rate for Korea is estimated somewhere between 1.5 to 1.8% for this year. So the actual growth is double the actual expected growth rate. And usually when you have the actual growth rate that high above the potential, twice as high as the potential, that usually means overheating. Now, there's some special technical issues involved here. The growth is mostly taking place in the semiconductor sector, so other sectors are still in a more or less a slowdown. A lot of the growth is taking place, and this is a very technical issue, but rather than increase in volume of semiconductors produced, it's actually due to increase in prices of semiconductors. But still, this year's government expenditure was the largest on record. Next, and they're planning to increase even more, as you said, 800 trillion won next year. And a lot of that is actually concentrated in the AI sector. The government's justification is that they want to strike while the iron is hot, so they're going to keep on investing in the AI and semiconductor sectors. I think they have enough money there already. So they're really in danger of overheating that sector. Now, I have no objection to R&D expenditure in that sector. China is catching up. U.S. Is catching up as well. Also, some infrastructure may be needed, but do we really need some direct subsidies to some of these companies when there's more than enough money going around in that sector? I don't think so. If they are going to spend the money, maybe they should reallocate it into some of the sectors that are not doing well, assist structural adjustment there. And also, we're not going to have years like this every year where we have so much tax revenues. So we should take more care about government deficit and increasing the debt.
Right. As Professor Yang has mentioned, a bigger budget also raises financing concerns as well. Then, Professor Kim, how much of a risk is greater government borrowing to bond yields and market rates?
I think that's one of the probably underappreciated risk because, we normally use this fiscal expansions, especially if the economy is in hard, the situations and things like that. So sometimes people view it as most sort of like a rescue team or something. But as Professor Yang mentioned, I think at this stage, economy is already doing really well, and the private sector has enough liquidity, I think, to do R&Ds and things like that. So I'm not a big fan of talking about the crowding out effect of like this, government sector sort of like eating out the private sector. But in this case, it's possible, I think, because other than semiconductor areas, I think the other areas are still like, not completely just recovered. So I think it's in the middle of doing this. So if we have to help a little bit, given the budget, probably we can help the other sectors a little more in terms of like, the related areas and also somewhat like, less related areas. But I think, just increasing these kind of things is going to just only increasing further this risk, especially related to this financing part, because if you actually borrow more, then what happens is going to be the price of the borrowing is going to be costlier, meaning the interest rate is going to be even higher. So I think now the Fed, the BOK is increasing the interest rate in the short term. And now if the fiscal side is going to borrow more, and therefore this is going to also increase the interest rate for both short-term and long-term, I think this is going to increase the overall interest rate. So that means the borrowing cost for other areas like the private sectors, especially the housing and many other sectors, will have issues, especially if they already have a lot of debt, which I think is probably the case. So one of the risks I think here is the coordination risk. I'm not sure how intimately the BOK and then the Treasury actually are talking in this point. But given that the BOK is doing the right move in terms of fixing probably the inflation part and also the cooling down slightly in terms of the exchange rate risk and things like that, I think the fiscal side of the expansion probably, if it can be curbed a little bit, I think that's probably the better scenario.
So too much borrowing could be really burdensome in many areas, especially, aging and other spending pressures are growing in the country. Then, Professor Young, how much room does Korea have to possibly keep expanding its budget?
Not much. This year was an extraordinary year in terms of tax revenue. They're expecting this to continue next year, but there's no guarantee that it will last every year from now on. And if you keep on expanding the expenditures, especially in the non-discriminatory, non-discretionary areas, then you're stuck with this large expenditure, but your tax revenues may fall. And then there's sort of the international aspect. Ever since President Trump passed his budget bill for the U.S. last year, there has been a lot of attention being paid to government deficits and debt, not only in the United States, but in most advanced countries. Now, in Korea, our debt load is perhaps not as bad as some of the other advanced countries, but it's rising, and because of these demographic factors, because of the falling productivity, everyone knows that it's going to increase. So we have an extraordinarily good year this year for tax revenues, but it appears like we're not really taking care of reducing the deficit or reducing the debt. So if we're not going to do it when we have a really fortunate year this year, when are we going to do it? And that could, I think, really affect the international borrowing rates for Korea, not only for the government, but perhaps Korean firms as well.
So the repercussions, it really goes beyond just the budget itself. So with monetary policy tightening, while fiscal policy expands, Professor Kim, how should the two work together from here on?
That's always a million-dollar question. It's a hard question. So I think monetary policy definitely should keep doing what it's built to do. So to manage the inflation cycle and then lead against the speculative excess areas in like housing or some other, this stuff, and also the macro prudential tools in terms of looking at the loan to value, debt service ratio limits and things like that. So I think BOK is going into the right direction. So I think keep just doing what they're doing, I think would make things probably just in good mood, and also to make the investors happier and then people happy, I think. Of course, they have to keep watching because, there's always nowadays, the political uncertainties just around the world is just very big. So I think, always just keen on that, I think is important. Fiscal policy, meanwhile, needs to be far more, I would say, selective than a just blunt kind of the broad-based kind of stimulus, especially if the fiscal side is going to be expanding like this. And I think this one can actually also generate additional inflation. So the physical sort of the story of the inflation is non-trivial. So if you just keep borrowing and if you just keep spending, that's going to basically just to make the money just everywhere, the easy money, basically. That means inflation is also likely. So at least in terms of policy coordination for the time being, if the fiscal side is going to be a little more, I would say, just prudential about that, I think that would be nice, especially given that our projection for this the expenditure is going to increase. I think this would be a good idea to at least to coordinate well with the BOK, and also to think about just paying back some of the debts to lower the debt to GDP ratio and things like that. So I think overall that's probably what's remaining.
Right, so we'll have to find the right balance between supporting growth and keeping inflation and debt risks in check moving forward. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Always a pleasure.
We'll have to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Professor Yang, as well.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
It's time for today's news, the Daily Report. From current developments in Korea